Wonderful. And with that, we'll begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining, and welcome to today's event discussing the role of trade unions in the history of Palestinian popular struggle with Green Olive's senior partner, Mohammed Barakat. My name is Erez Bleicher, and I'm the Advocacy and Membership Director of the Green Olive Collective, an advocacy, information, and tour guiding center committed to a democratic future and an end to the ongoing displacement of Palestinians. We provide communities around the world with insight into the apartheid policies of the occupation and the resources to engage in meaningful advocacy in solidarity with Palestinians. This event today is part of our January membership drive to sustain solidarity in the new year in 2025. You can become a member and join the International Green Olive Solidarity Network or make a one-time contribution at the links I put into the chat moments ago. Your contributions will go to support on-the-ground community projects in the West Bank, like replanting olive trees after arson attacks by settlers, community gardens on lands threatened with expropriation, and rebuilding homes after demolitions. The Palestinian trade union movement has always played a central role in the Palestinian struggle for political sovereignty. Trade unions were instrumental in mobilizing general strikes during the First Intifada, shaping Palestinian party politics, past and present, and mobilizing workers to fight for dignity despite conditions of occupation. Mohammed Barakat, as I said before, is a senior partner of the Green Olive Collective and a second-generation refugee whose family was expelled from their home outside Jerusalem during the 1948 Nakba. He is a witness to all the major political events in recent decades, including the Six-Day War, the Intifadas, and the entrenchment of military rule in the West Bank. Mohammed has organized hotel and hospitality workers for many years, including during the First Intifada, as a member of the executive board of the Hotels and Restaurant Workers Trade Union, and was a member of the executive committee of the Progressive Workers Union. He will speak with us from experience about the development of Palestinian labor politics into the 1980s and the larger context of Palestinian union organizing up until today. Mohammed, thank you for your time and for being with us here today. The last thing I'll say before we begin, and I'll pass to you, is that hopefully there will be time at the end of this session for open conversation and a question and answer period. So as Mohammed begins to speak with us and share, feel free from this moment on to send questions in the chat. If you can just write the word question followed by a dash or colon, I'll know to look for it and hopefully can integrate it into the end of our session. So with that, sincere thanks again, Mohammed. I'll pass to you. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I'm already on. Thanks a lot, Erez. Good evening, everyone. I could see some of you have been with me a long time ago, others. And I'm happy to have you again with me. So today I'm going to talk about the trade unions and the labor force movement through the years of beginning of it, which started through the mandate time, the British mandate. So in 1917, the First World War had been, vanished with the taking over the Middle East by the British and the French, which they divided the area among them. And that time, Britain was the main power over Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. So one of the major projects that the British have done, they built, first of all, the new port, which is Haifa port in the north of Palestine. And they connected Haifa with a pipeline to bring the oil from Iraq towards the Mediterranean and to ship it later on to Europe and so on. So it was the first time in Palestine to start to have a trade unions and the workers unions. It happened in the port of Haifa. It was Arabs and Israelis who joined together to build the first trade union in 1920. It was a way to start this types of movement against, I mean, to organize the workers, to have their rights, and to educate them how to manage their rights to their own, companies or their factories or farms and so on. So this is how it just ran on. During the years of the mandate, there was a lot of, demonstrations, strikes in all over Palestine, which was the largest one in 1936. It remained over 6 months, where also the workers have been part of it. Till 1948, when we had what we call it the First War, which caused the Nakba. And that's where most of the Palestinians have fled out of their own homelands, and they started to be scattered all over the Middle East and away from it, even though in the world. So some of them went to Syria, some of them to Lebanon, others to the West Bank and Jordan, and others to Gaza. So in that time, we were under, the people of the West Bank, we were under the rules of the Jordanian power or the Jordanian regime. And in 1950, we were part as a unity between the West Bank of Jordan and the East Bank of Jordan. So we were part of carrying the citizenship of Jordan. And in that time, the king was, trying to have his influence over the country, which was very hard to practice any types of, to build in trade unions and so on. But in 1956, it was the first experience for the king himself to have a way to do a kind of democracy in the country by appointing a prime minister. His name is Sliman Nabulsi. He was one of those progressive, figures, and to form a new government in Jordan, which at that time was a show to prove to the people that he's running through the democratic or democracy types of rules in the country. And that was the time that the people started to build the trade unions, and the federations and so on. But it was a trap from the king that time to bring up all those leftists, the people who believe that they are communists and so on. And he mostly have detained, arrested all the leadership of those trade unions and big figures of the leftist parties, and even imprisoned them in a desert prison. It's called Jaffa. And it was a one step forward for the people to start to think about their rights and to organize themselves through the trade unions, which in fact, it happened in the 60s, where those trade unions started to, to build up. And in 1964, I believe, the hotels and restaurants workers have started their trade union. And you have to understand that in Palestine, we didn't have a big companies, sharing shares and so on. It was family business mostly. So most of the hotels in Jerusalem were businesses of families. And the trade union that time, it was mostly, no one knows about the leaders of those movements, because it was mostly in secret, covered people. So I didn't, I was a young fellow that time. I don't know about the trade unions, but I remember that my uncle was one of the members of the executive committee of the hotels and restaurants workers. So in 1967, we had the war, what we call it the Nakba, which is the 6 Days War. To me, it was only 20 hours of war, and things have been, no one knows how to go on with the new regime that we started to be under occupation. So the main thing was those activists, mostly the leftists, to run on to educate and to keep the awareness over the people. They started to rebuild back the trade unions. And the first thing that they built up, it was, we call it the National Front, which was a coalition of more of the leftist leadership that time, which Israel have attacked that leadership in the 1974, and most of those leaders have been, some of them have been exiled out of the country or deported, and others were in jail, in prison. I started to work, after 1973 war. That was a new move in Israeli society, that they voted for the right wing in Israel, the Likud, after the elections in 1975. And that time, which the first settlements which had been erected in the center of the West Bank, which 3 of them had been built in the mid of the 70s after the war of 1973, which is Alon Morey, Ofra, and Kiryat Arba. So as the new Minister of Defense, to show that Israel is a democratic state, he gave the right to run a first election in the West Bank for the mayor, we call it in the local councils, in the cities, the villages, and the communities in Palestine. And that time, the Palestinians were always talking about the main representative of the Palestinian is the PLO. So those activists and the leadership that time, they were having the lists, which was joint list and coalitions of those main power of the PLO, factions of the PLO, which they have won most of the cities, the municipalities in the cities and the local councils of the whole villages and so on. So it was a spark to show that the power of the labor force started to come up. And this is the time when we went back to rebuild back the trade unions, because according to the Israeli law, all what had been in the country, given the right as protected by the law in Israel, which had been given the whole types of institutions or trade unions or whatever to go on. So it was a time to rebuild back the trade unions, which started with mainly the left parties of the Palestinian factions in the West Bank. So 1977, 1978, this was the re-functioning the Palestinian in Jerusalem mainly. The trade union, which is the hotels and restaurants workers of the hotels in Jerusalem, which was the largest in the West Bank, even though. So our work in that time, it was a way to protect our institutions, our hotels, our businesses in East Jerusalem, and to be sure that our workers should be away from the Israeli hostage route. We want to keep them away, and we want to protect our hotels and our main part of East Jerusalem, because we believe that East Jerusalem is still part of the occupied territories, where Israel wants to, which there was a law in 1981 taking that Jerusalem is part of Israel. So it was a big challenge between us as trade unions and the Israeli big trade union, which is the hostage route. So we have that rule as a way to bring some parts of to achieve some types of profit to or kinds of grants to the Palestinian workers of the hotels. I'm talking about just focusing over the work that I did in Jerusalem in end of the 70s up till 1995. So our work was a way to convince the workers not to register in the Israeli hostage route, mainly the blue cards workers, which is Jerusalemites, and to be sure that the Palestinian workers, which they usually comes from all over the West Bank, to come to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the main power of the tourism sector after the war of 67. Israel, that time in the year 67, they didn't have in West Jerusalem a lot of hotels. There were only a couple of hotels, big hotels, and small hostels. So the main tourism sector used to be in our side, in East Jerusalem. So it was a big challenge between us and the Israeli West Jerusalem. And after the war of 73, that's when Israel, and after mainly the peace treaty with Egypt, it was the time that Israel started to focus over the tourism sector. And it started to build the new hotels in West Jerusalem. So it was a big challenge for us to keep our business running, to keep our hotels. Even we were having lower salaries as what Israeli hotels are giving to the workers. But we convinced our workers, it's our challenge here to protect these institutions, these hotels, to keep them running, because this is our rights. This is our way to stop or to be sure that we will remain as Palestinians in Jerusalem. We don't want that the history to interfere in our work or our businesses. So we have succeeded to have types of agreements with the hotel owners, which they are Palestinians also, families who owns these, mostly the businesses, as to give the Palestinians workers in these hotels what we call it a minimum wages, which was $500 almost, and give them a annual vacation, which was 21 days, on even more than that, and also to give them, to empower them to stay and to work in the hotels, not to go to the other side, a month as bonus, 13 months a year. So it was a way to be sure that those people remain. And also, in that time, Israel didn't have the healthcare yet. So we started to build our healthcare for the workers, to be sure that those people will get healthcare in their villages, their cities. We arrange these types of partnership with doctors, with hospitals, with pharmacies, and so on, which that gave more power to the workers to stay, not to leave the Palestinian hotels, and to keep working in these hotels, and to challenge and to compete the Israelis. Now, the Palestinians trade union, which was mostly that time in the 70s to the 80s, it was run mostly with the leftist parties, mostly what we call them the communist parties and the Democratic Party of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and also the Popular Front. Fatah movement at that time wasn't convinced that these types of work will help. They were believing in other types of resistance up till 1982, when those people, the Palestinians leadership and the Palestinians PLO, movement had been driven out of Lebanon. And it was the time that Fatah movement have noticed that during the years that the Palestinians leftists have built a new system in the occupied territories, and awareness through the workers, trade unions, and it was a way that most of the people that time, they were supporting those factions, the leftist factions. So it was a big challenge to Fatah to come to these trade unions and to start to build a new trade unions. I remember in the 80s, it was a big festivals when we have the elections in these trade unions. And I believe that in the 80s, we had every aspect, every sector in the country have a trade union. And it was a way to challenge among us who's going to give more power to the Palestinian workers. But in fact, Israel, as a big country at that time, the borders of Israel had been doubled after the War of '67. The whole Sinai, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, the whole Jordan border, the Golan Heights, the South Lebanon. So they need a lot of security at that time. Soldiers were over there on the border lines, but they need to build the country. So they need labor force. And that's why they found that the cheap and the most powerful labor force was the Palestinians, which was under the occupation. So they used us as a cheap labor force in all over Israel. And I remember that people that time have left their land because it was easy to go to find jobs and works in Israel and to have better, income than the land work. And that, shows the Israelis that some of these lands were completely empty, where they started in the end of this, after the agreement with Egypt. That's when Israel started to turn its face, to the West Bank to build the settlements. So the big wave of settlements construction started in the mid of the 70s, in the 77, 78, end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, where a lot of those big settlements have been founded. And this is where they used a lot of Palestinian workers. Now, during the years between 82 up till 87, the First Intifada, it was the time to build up the trade unions. And there was a big challenge between the federation of the trade unions. It was one federation. I remember in the mid of the 80s, it had been divided to have two federation for the trade unions. Till the Intifada happened in 1987, where the role of the trade union was, because one of the main titles which the trade unions in Palestine have used, it was, we are under the PLO, we support the PLO. The only representative of the Palestinians people and the main address for the Palestinians is the PLO. So that was a major part of our way of work in the trade unions, is to empower the PLO. So during the First Intifada, it was a way to call over the workers to stop working in the Israeli sectors. And it was a big effect against the Israeli economy in 1988, 1987, and 1988, where Israel that time discovered that they cannot, they realized that they cannot depend on the Palestinian labor force, and they started to import international labor force. And even though they could not completely stop not depending on the Palestinians, but they slowly, they were trying to get rid of the Palestinians' labor force. I believe that in 1990s, they had over 150,000 foreign workers in the country. But even though the Palestinians were trying to get the major, which is the main struggle to get our rights and our freedom. So we reached 1993, the Oslo Accords Agreement, 1994, which that time we had the Oslo Accords Agreement, where the PLO came and we had the Palestinian Authority. So imagine that before the Palestinian Authority, we were just trying to support and to empower the labor force, our workers in our own areas, in our cities, in our villages, in our fields, and so on, and to support and to empower the PLO. Now, when the Palestinian Authority came, so we had that time we thought that we will have better chance of life, and it will be much easier for the trade unions to work and to feel that they are already have freedom and to act to get more kinds of benefits to the workers. But it just ran for a couple of years, where things have been changed through the time of the Palestinian Authority. We had a lot of difficulties after the murdering of Mr. Rabin and having the right-wing government, the coalitions of the right wing with Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, building more settlements starting to get out of what we have agreed on, which that left us to the Second Intifada, where Israel was ready, and Israel that time have completely stopped all those Palestinian workers to enter Israel. Just imagine in the year 2002, there were 0 workers in Israel of Palestinians. It was hard for the Palestinian trade unions that time and to the Palestinian labor force. So things have changed because that time we were only, having our struggle against the occupation and against the Israeli, to help our workers in the Israeli markets, in the Israeli Israeli areas, by having a kinds of, we having lawyers to get their rights and to make some types of training for them. So it wasn't that easy. But when the Palestinian Authority came to the country, that makes it much harder for us, for the trade unions mainly, because there was a big gap between the Palestinian workers who had the chance to work in Israel with their wages and their salaries, and the Palestinians who are working inside Palestine, inside the Palestinian Authorities area. Because the minimum wages in Israel was much higher, where in Palestine, with even the agreement between the Palestinian trade unions and the Palestinian Authority and the owners of the industrials or the the work in Palestine, the authority, the minimum wage was about $500, which was 1,450 shekels. It was just as third of the income of those Palestinian workers who have been getting permits to work in Israel. So that was, we're talking about almost 1994 and 2000, the year 2000, which the only thing that time, the trade unions started to have what we call it the right of strikes, demonstrations against the Palestinian Authority, not against the workers, the establishments, the factories, and so on. But it was very hard to accept what is running on, because the PLO was the leadership. The Palestinian Authority is part of the PLO, and our term as trade unionists and so on, it was a way to empower the PLO. And suddenly we are having the Palestinian Authority as part of the the administration that we have to fight against to get much benefits, or to get the benefits and more suitable life to our workers. So there was a lot of strikes in several areas, demonstrations for the workers, but it wasn't that powerful, because when you start to work against the Palestinian Authority, you are weakening the Palestinian Authority. And also you could see that the Palestinian Authority is completely, have no power even in doing some projects out and to do kinds of businesses for those workers. So the Palestinian labor force had no chance of trying to find himself. Before it, we were focusing over how to manage to get rights for our workers from one main target, which was the Israeli occupation, because they are the responsible of the life of the Palestinians that time. And it was easy to stand against it. But when it came to be the Palestinian Authority and to face the authority itself, it was so hard. I think nowadays it is a big problem that we are facing in the trade unions. We have 3 federations of the trade unions. We have over 50% or more than 500,000 Palestinian workers without work nowadays. There is no chance. Israel is not giving the right for those workers, which they were over almost 170,000 to 200,000 Palestinians from the West Bank to work in Israel. Even the Israeli, trade unions, the Histadrut, others, trying to convince the government to give permissions for the Palestinian workers to come to work in Israel because they are in need. But some of those ministers in Israel, they are against it, and they don't want to have Palestinians workers inside Israel. So they started to import new, workers, foreigner workers in Israel. So we are in a big mess now. In Gaza, the labor force completely is down. No one is looking for it nowadays. In the West Bank, we have over 40 to 50% without work. The minimum wages in Palestine nowadays is almost still around $500. The expenses, the daily life expenses, very high. So it is a terrible situation. The federation got some donations from the European Union to provide some of those workers, which they stuck. I mean, mostly they are from Gaza. They were working in Israel, and since the war of 7th of October, they have been thrown to the West Bank, and now they're still in the West Bank, most of them. So you have to provide them with work and also food and something. So this is where the General Federation of the Palestinian Labor Force of the trade unions, they are working with them, trying to at least to give them food baskets every month and so on. So when we look at the trade unions, since it started, we could see that they were part of the way to bring the Palestinians and to organize them in a way to defend their rights, and to, mostly because we were under occupation, it was a way to give them awareness is how to manage to be away from what we call it, the Israeli, mostly the Histadrut, the trade unions in Israel, and to be sure that we are trying to bring up what we call it, the freedom and the free state of Palestine. So we were at least trying our best in a way to educate our workers and to achieve types of, achieve some of those agreements with the owners of the factories, companies, to our workers, even with all the obstacles that we were having, but we succeeded in a way to make a balance between the workers and the Palestinians, owners of companies and industrials and so on. So I'll be ready to answer if you have any questions. So it will be much better if we have, to talk about things that you might just are anxious to hear about it.
Thank you, Mohammed. So appreciated. And thanks for all the invaluable insight and perspective you've shared about the development of the Palestinian labor movement, the economic inequality and exploitation inherent to occupation, and the need for autonomous Palestinian trade unions as part of building Palestinian collective freedom and self-determination. I've been collecting some of the questions people have been sending in the chat, and hopefully there will be time for more. I want to just start with one first question and ask you maybe to share a little bit more about the Histadrut and the history of the relationship between Palestinian workers and the Histadrut. Of course, it is part of the history of the labor and socialist Zionist, quote unquote, left Zionist movements, as they called themselves, and presented themselves as pro-labor and socialist, though their directive was to build an exclusive labor force of Jewish workers, did not include Palestinians. And I guess I wanted to just ask you to share a little bit more about why, in relationship to the Histadrut, it was so important and is so important to have autonomous Palestinian institutions.
Well, Israel as a state, it had been built as, started with the kibbutzes and types of trade unions. And I believe that Israel, since 1948, they were focusing over mainly the power of the military. So all the economy of Israel was built towards the economy of the military, mostly. But they built also beside that because mostly they were coming from socialist countries, and that's where they started to build the types of, as I told you, kibbutzes and the common work together, and the power of the Histadrut, which was part of the Labor Party in Israel, which was the major or the biggest party in Israel, and also other small parties. But it was a way to give opportunities to develop the country of Israel. And we could see that as Palestinians, inside Israel, which they were citizens of Israel, they were part of mostly part of the Communist Party that time. They were part of the Communist Party, and they were, struggling for their rights inside Israel. But for us as Palestinians under occupation, we feel that the Histadrut was part of the Zionist movement itself. We believe that they were defending its own, the state of Israel. But they used us as labor force because they need us. They need us to build Israel. If you just bring part of the way of life in Israel in the 60s and 70s, and nowadays you could feel the approach of the development in Israel. It was much strong enough to show it to you, because in the 60s, 50s and 60s, things were much more, as I told you, close state, working mostly for the right of defense. And the Israeli that time, they don't have open economy. It was mostly you cannot deal with any foreign currency in the time of Israel up till the mid of the 70s, when they started to have an open economy and to deal with the foreign currencies. It was forbidden to carry on any type of foreign currencies. And that shows you that Israel was mostly building as a type of socialist country. But since the Likud took over, that's where Israel started to move and to shift more to the right and to have an open economy and more of the capitalism movements more. And you could see it nowadays. I don't believe that in Israel you have a labor force. You cannot see it. There is no Israelis are working. Maybe there is about 10 to 20% of the workers inside Israel who are working in constructions and types of, but mostly they are in the IT, the technologies and so on. So they need, workers for the construction, for the farms, for the factories, and that's where they just hire the Palestinians labor force. But again, what we have discovered, that the Histadrut itself is part of the government. It's part of the state. When the wars against Gaza, the Histadrut was supporting the country, supporting the state, supporting the army. So that shows you the differences between our trade unions, which believes in the rights of the Palestinians, and the Histadrut, which believes with the right of the state, not the workers. So that's a big differences between, and that's why we were trying to keep our workers away from the Histadrut, because we want them to be sure that we are not part of the state of Israel. We are part of the Palestinian territories, which is under the Israeli occupation, and we are looking for our freedom. So we were organizing, doing our right of struggle, type of struggle to build our state. And this is part of the state that we were looking for, is to have the trade unions, which is the main power for the labor force.
Thank you, Mohammed. Very well said. And I've spoken also with union organizers in Wakman and also Israeli union organizers who talk also about the ways that the Histadrut historically has always favored the national state interest, security interest, over the workers' interests, and it undermines workers' rights and collective power across the board. But that was very helpful to hear. Thank you. You mentioned the ways that the state of Israel relies on Palestinians living under occupation as a cheap or cheaper labor force. You talked about that in various moments, including during the First and Second Intifadas. I guess I wanted to ask you about this moment also, if you want to share more about what is the conditions of workers now or since over the last year and a half, since October 7th, the permit regime, how have things developed in the last year?
You know, before the COVID, let's talk about, and after the Second Intifada, Israel was in need for the labor force because they tried to have the internationals, but they have discovered that the international labor force was much more, they have more negative than positive. Because those internationals were transferring back to their countries foreign currencies. And they weren't so powerful in work as as the Palestinians, where the Palestinians workers, usually they work in Israel, they got the payments, but they have to buy from Israel back. So the money comes back to Israel. So it circles back to the pockets of the Israelis government. So they started to give permissions. And we have over 40 types of permissions. And mostly the workers who work in Israel, they have to buy the permission. They have to pay for it. Sometimes you pay over 2,000 shekels to get the permission to work. If you have a kind of profession that it will get you a good job in Israel, you can gain more than 600 shekels a day or 700 shekels a day. Where in Palestine, in the Palestinians area, whatever you can get, it's not more than 250 to 300 shekels. The daily workers in the Palestinians area might get in certain areas in the Ramallah area, Bethlehem, they might get 150 shekels a day. In Nablus, other cities, we might get 120 shekels a day. But in Gaza, that's different, completely different. Gaza, since the year 2006, because before the war, before the 2006, Israel were using over 50,000 to 70,000, or mainly once it has been over 100,000 Palestinian workers from Gaza. And also the Gazians were part of the trade unions. And we have we call it the unity of the trade unions between Gaza and the Palestinians of the West Bank in the 70s and 80s. So we were working together, and it was a way to build that unity between the two main federations of the trade unions in Gaza and the West Bank. So we know that in the people in Gaza and in the West Bank, before the peace agreement, the Oslo peace accords, they were having the right to move freely from the West Bank with their vehicles to drive into Israel, to go to work and back, or to stay in Israel, and even from Gaza. Now, since Oslo, where we, as Palestinians, we were thinking that the situation will be much better for us. It just came to be much worse, because before, you don't need a permit to go to work in Israel, even for the people of the West Bank and Gaza. But since Oslo, you have to get a permit to go to either to Israel or to come to East Jerusalem to work. So that was such hard, because if you have been in prison, if you have been detained, if one of your close family was, a prisoner, it will be hard to get a permit. So what you have to do is you have to accept to work in the authority area, in the Palestine, in the Palestinians areas, which it is much lower income for you. And some of those Palestinians will have the risk, a very high risk, to jump over the wall or to cross through the fences to go to Israel to work, because that risk will get you a better income. But sometimes, which is happening nowadays, there is a law in Israel now. Anyone who get into Israel without a permission, he will be in prison, and a lot of, has to pay a big fine, and his life will be completely damaged. So Israel, up till today, they have used only and gave the right to some of those workers who are working in the settlements, which is inside Palestine. They have no chance to cross through the crossing and the border between the West Bank and Israel. So they gave them the right to work in the settlements. But even though the type of work that they are doing in the settlements, much more, it's constructions, building, or working in the fields or something. So they have to collect their ID cards. They have to also to show their ID, the permit they had been given, and they will collect their ID cards and the permits, and they will give them a tag to put it on their on their chest to show that they are foreigners, and they will be really frightened mainly in some of those settlements. If something happened, they will be under attack. Some of them. So the up to the day, what there is a chance to work. I have seen several of those Palestinians, the ones who are working in the mainly industrial commercial settlements in the West Bank. We are talking about not more than 20,000 or 30,000 of those Palestinians who have the chance to get back to work in the settlements only. And I'm sorry to tell you that we as Palestinians, we are the ones who have built the settlements in the West Bank because there was no other alternatives. Once the Palestinian Authority in the Second Intifada have asked the General Federation of the Palestinian trade unions to call over the workers to stop working in Israel. It was the answer from the trade union that time, we have to find them alternative. If they have to stop to work in Israel, we have to find them work in the authorities area, which is, we can't have it, because every year we have over 50,000 graduate students from the universities. What will be getting work and jobs in the Palestinian Authority is only 5% of those 50,000. So the rest of them have to go towards the labor to work in the Israeli fields or in the Palestinian areas as workers, daily workers. So this is what we are in. The permissions, again, it's not given easily. I have been talking, I have several times, I got types of tours to go towards the checkpoints, mainly the one in Qalqilia, to see how the daily life of those workers. They have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, to go to the crossing areas, to stand on a long queues of people till they have the chance to step into checking, which takes them time, a while also, to go to the other side. I have seen them several times sleeping on the other side of the border, waiting for the contractor to come and pick them, or the vehicles to come to pick them, because they spend over 16 hours a daily, 16 hours, the time that they wake up to cross, to go to work and come back through the checkpoints to go back to their homes. It is a big risk that the Palestinian workers usually have in the Israeli areas. The Palestinians who are working in the occupied territories, inside the Palestinian cities and all, they accepted a low wages because for them it's much safe and much easier life. And this is what we are having. The challenge to get better chance of life, to get higher income, you have to have this risk and this types of slavery move that you are having it every day, crossing through the checkpoints with the checking, taking the roads. And you could see, if you have a chance to come and see, early morning, floods of those workers coming through the checkpoints, staying on the streets to find some, transportation to take them to work, and also at the afternoon time when they come back to their homes. So this is the way of life that we are having.
Thank you,
There's no
Mohammed.
stability for them.
I'm going to try to move us forward to the next question only for the sake of time, because there's so much that's so important and so rich in everything you're sharing. And of course, like you just mentioned, we do invite, of course, everyone to join us on the ground in person, to meet with Mohammed, to meet with human rights defenders in the communities in person. Reach out anytime for those of you who will be in the region or want to join us on our tours or solidarity missions. Mohammed, you touched on some very important things in the words you just shared, like the ways that the permit regime is and economy is used as a lever of control by the state of Israel and by the occupation. You mentioned, for example, how people who, for example, are arrested at any point for political activities, demonstration, then will not be able to get a permit later. The livelihood, the economy is used as a mechanism of control to squash dissent and collective political action on multiple fronts. And of course, for those who have joined in past webinars of ours, for example, like one with Sam Bahur, he has also talked about related issues in the ways that Palestinian customs, tariffs, taxes, and other economic instruments are under the control of Israel and used to forward different security purposes. So learning from you, Mohammed, about the ways that union activists from the West Bank and Gaza have worked to create worker solidarity and power in the face of all that is deeply, deeply inspiring. We have time, I think, unfortunately, for just two last questions. Two people in the chat asked if you have any thoughts about the current state of the Palestinian General Federation of Trade
I
Unions,
saw
or
there's a question.
the new Federation of Trade
Yes,
Unions
yes, I
also.
saw this question,
So,
the new federation.
unfortunately, we're running out of time. So if you could share, though, a few words about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me tell you. Well, I know the new federation, the new trade unions. I spoke to some of them. I attended their their congress 2 years ago, and the elections that happened. I know the director. I mean the general secretary of that trade union. He was also part of our block in the past. Um, they are doing a good work, by the way. I have good relations with the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Union, which is the main one, the one that had started since the Jordanian era, which is still continuing, which is run by Shahr Saad, the General Secretary of the Trade Union. And the new one, which is the new the new trade union, they are working. They have representatives of the workers from the southern of the country, from the center, from Bethlehem area, from Hebron, and from the north and Ramallah. You know that it's not that easy to work nowadays with the trade unions. It's very difficult. You have to, you know, to keep the balance between the workers that are working in Israel. You have to follow their work, their you know, complaints sometimes, because several of those workers, they worked in Israel, they haven't been paid by the owners or the contractors, and because, you know, for them, that's mainly if you are not having a permit and you went to work in Israel, some of those contractors, they used you for a couple of weeks and they just fire you out without paying you. So you come to the trade union, because we have these trade unions, they have lawyers from Arabs in Israel, from the citizens of Israel, to take their cases to the courts in Israel, to follow up their cases and to get them their rights. And it happened that I met some of those trade unions who works with the new trade union, and they have followed several cases of those workers, which they have been kicked out of work without paying it, and they succeeded to get their rights back, hundreds thousands of shekels to the workers. So this is part of the work of the trade unions, is to follow up the workers who are working in Israel, or the cases which is coming up with the rights of the workers inside the Palestinian areas. Like I know that in the Palestinian area, we, as I told you, we have the minimum wages. Some of those private companies or private works, mainly the we call them the the kinds of working, the women work, especially the women work, they will accept as a woman worker, very low payments, not more than $150 a month, because they need the income to help the family. So they could take this, the owners of, the factories or the companies or the fields, even because some of those were Palestinians, ladies and women, they are working in the Israeli settlements inside the Palestinians areas, which they are also getting a very low income. So they might just, if they will come to the trade unions, and the trade unions started to work with them to educate them, to give them training, to empower them, and also to talk about their rights. And so now they are having a lot of those, cases against some of those, mainly factories or businesses, or also inside the fields as agriculture sector.
Mohammed, do
So
you
it
want
is
to
happening.
say, yeah, do you want to say just a word on the note that you were just talking about around the history of women in the trade unions and in the leadership? I know there's a deep history there.
Yeah. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, women wasn't that, they weren't yet in the market, working. But later on, after as I told you, that we started to have trade unions for all aspects or sectors. We have trade unions for the doctors, for the engineers, the lawyers, which was one of the main big trade unions. I remember when they usually used to have their elections, they used to come to use our hotels halls, and they were having types of coalitions, groups, and so on. It was a festival that time when we have elections in the occupied territories by any types of trade unions, the lawyers, the engineers, the doctors, the workers of the hospitals. All those workers have been organized through the trade unions. And this is the major part of it, that those were part of the PLO. They were part of the factions of the PLO, functioning through the trade unions to empower the PLO. And that was, I'm talking about the 70s and 80s, which that gives the results that the PLO had been accepted by the international, and also it was a way to start the negotiations, but by the Israeli government and the PLO. Because the main title of the trade unions was, our main address is the PLO. And that was the main power, which even empower us as a trade unionists when we start to talk and to make agreements with the owners of, or the factories owners or the businesses owners, that we are also representing the PLO in our way of trying to find kinds of solutions and agreements. So this was the way to empower the PLO during our work through the trade unions. The woman rule started in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, because most of those women, if they are worker women, or some of them, they got they graduate from the universities, they have degrees, but they don't find other types of work. They will accept any type of work just to, to feel that they have to feel that they are part of, the Palestinians workers or the Palestinians nation, to start to come up, to raise as we are a civilized nation. So in the part of our election system, that over 25 to 30% of the ones who are the candidates should be women. And that reflects also in our way of trade unions and also administrations in several establishments, that women should be part of it. And up till today, we have a lot of those women's trade unions, and they are very active and very powerful, and they are part of the members of the parliament, the Palestinians trade unions, and also in the Palestinian authorities areas, and you could see that there's more educated women than even male in our country. The feminist part of our the graduations of the universities, over 60% to over 60 to 65% of the students at the universities in our country, they are the women.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Feminists.
And I know for those of you here who maybe have seen the incredible documentary Naila and the Uprising, I know, Mohammed, that you know Naila and
Yeah,
know
I know Naila.
the women leadership in the First Intifada and the general strikes and in the autonomous organizing that took place. But we'll have to talk more about it another time soon. Very lastly, someone in the chat mentioned or shared the sentiment that if unions around the world held a general strike in their own countries, it could help to pressure governments towards a ceasefire. That's a very powerful sentiment. But I guess in a broader, more general sense, I just wanted to end by asking you, how can people involved in labor and union organizing and organized labor around the world act in solidarity with Palestinian workers now and with Palestinians generally living under occupation? Any last thoughts?
Well, I think that I mentioned that we have a lot of those connections with the international trade unions. I mean, the General Federation Trade Union have very good connections, and I think that he had been elected to be the vice president of the international LO, I believe, the labor union. Shahar Said, he's well-known, figure of the trade unions. I believe that the last years, I could see that there is a lot of those movements in the world supporting the Palestinian cause and the Palestinians' liberation and the Palestinians' freedom. And I could see that most of those, trade unions of the world, they are sending their support to our trade unions in the country. And it will be a very good example. I mean, if it has a certain day for all the trade unions of the world to stand up on behalf of the Palestinians workers as a way to give them, to support them and to feel that we are not left alone and that there is somebody is looking for us, for our rights and for our freedom. It will be a good way to show to the world that we still, as worker labor force, we still, stand beside each other and support each other. Now, that's what we need nowadays. We need to stop the war. I believe this is a way, the one-day strike in all over the world with the trade unions, there will be a good sign and a good message, a very good, very powerful message to the Israeli state, to the government of Israel mainly. You have to stop the war because this is the only chance for us, for both sides, to start to build in the new types of, for the new generation mainly, to feel that we are supported by the international, by the people who believes in peace and justice. That's what we need. We need to prove to our new generation that the Palestinians are part of the internationals. They are part of the humans that we are seeing. We are feeling that they are supporting us and they will be always beside us to get our freedom and our liberty. And I hope that within the coming days that things will calm down, ceasefire will be ending the war and trying to find solutions, peaceful solutions for our tragedies that we are having in this region.
Thank you, Mohammed. And may we all learn from the example of the Palestinian labor movement what it means to build solidarity and unity in even the most difficult conditions and work towards a just future where there is dignity for all. So with that, unfortunately, we have to close for today. Thank you, Mohammed, endlessly for your time and for all the important.
Well, just also, I want to send my greetings to some of those faces that I have been seeing them, and I have worked with them, like Suzanne and her sister, long time. And also, I have seen some of those messages comes from so close friends like Peter Larson. I saw his name on.
Amazing.
I hope that we'll see them again in the country.
Inshallah.
And I believe that we will have a better life.
Inshallah.
Looking for a better life for all of us.
Inshallah. Before people are going, I just wanted to mention once more, as I said earlier, that this event is part of our January membership drive to sustain solidarity in the coming year. You can become a member and join the International Green Olive Solidarity Network or make a one-time contribution at the links I just put into the chat a moment ago. Your contributions will go to support community projects in the West Bank and with communities in the Jordan Valley and elsewhere that Mohammed works with, to rehabilitate olive orchards after arson attacks by settlers, plant community gardens on lands threatened with expropriation, rebuild after home demolitions, and sustain other initiatives that mobilize communities around the world in direct support of Palestinian human rights. Contributions will allow us to develop global campaigns empowering people around the world to take action, to sustain our tangible support for communities facing displacement in Area C, and build a robust infrastructure of solidarity, advocacy, and action in the coming year, and to continue to invest in international campaigns that highlight the voices of Israeli and Palestinian human rights defenders, insisting, especially now, that only freedom, equality, and an end to the ongoing Nakba can bring a future of dignity for all. As I mentioned before, Green Olive is hosting 3 solidarity missions in 2025. Everyone is welcome, and you can find more information at greenolivetours.com. We would love to host you and bring you to meet in person with Mohammed and other human rights defenders and our guides. We hope everyone here has good and peaceful days, and we send all of our support to all of you around the world, calling for justice. We will send a recording of this event, of course, tomorrow, and hope to see you all very soon. And we will be sending more information with calls to action and updates in the coming days. Much thanks, and have peaceful days. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good night.